Have you ever stopped to think about what you would do if you received a strange phone call from someone you love in the middle of the night? One of those calls that wakes you from a deep sleep with a voice on the other end sounding scared, confused, almost desperate? Now imagine discovering, hours later, that this person has simply disappeared, vanished without a trace. And the only clue left was a cryptic, hastily written message that said, "I am not alone." What would you think? That someone was with them? That they were being stalked? Or that something much more sinister was happening right then? This isn't just a fictional horror story created to scare. It really happened. And the most disturbing thing is that to this day, more than a decade later, no one knows what really happened that night. The case I'm going to tell you about today is one of the most intriguing and frightening disappearances in Texas, and involves an emergency call that even audio forensics experts couldn't fully decipher. A deserted road in the middle of nowhere, and a man who literally evaporates without a trace. Stay with me until the end, because what you'll discover now may surprise you. Brandon Lawson was an ordinary guy, a family man, a hard worker, 26 years old, with an unremarkable life. He wasn't a fugitive. He wasn't involved in any serious crimes. He had no known enemies. He was simply a man trying to get on with his life. But on the night of August 9th, 2013, everything changed. A domestic argument led Brandon to leave home and drive to his father's house to clear his head. A seemingly simple decision, one millions of people have made in their lives. But for Brandon, this decision became the beginning of a mystery that no one has been able to solve to this day. He got into his truck and drove along Highway 277, a lonely road that cuts through the Texas countryside. It was early morning. There was practically no traffic, just the silence of the Texas desert and the darkness of the night. Have you ever been there? Have you ever driven alone on an empty road in the middle of the night with that feeling of complete solitude? It's precisely in these kinds of scenarios that the strangest things seem to happen. Sometime that night, Brandon's truck ran out of gas. He pulled over to the side of the road near Bronte, Texas. It was an isolated area with virtually no cell phone signal. Brandon managed to call his brother, Kyle, for help. He said his car had broken down, and he needed gas. Kyle promised to come over. It all seemed like a minor setback, but nothing major. Until that moment, no one imagined that this would be the last time anyone would speak coherently to Brandon. Because what happened in the following minutes turned this case into one of the most disturbing disappearances in recent history. Brandon made a call to 911, the emergency services. And that call became one of the most debated and analyzed recordings by investigators and true story enthusiasts. What Brandon said on that call is confusing, chaotic, and difficult to understand. He sounded like he was running, panting, scared. He mentioned something about needing a police officer, about being pushed, about running through the woods. But the most terrifying thing was when he said he wasn't alone. "I'm not alone." 3 words that completely changed the perspective of this case. Because if Brandon wasn't alone on that deserted road in the middle of the night, who was with him? And why did he look so terrified? From that moment on, Brandon Lawson simply disappeared, as if the earth had opened up and swallowed him whole. And that's where the mystery really begins. When Brother Kyle arrived at the scene minutes later, he found the truck abandoned on the side of the road. But Brandon wasn't there. A truck driver who also stopped to help said he'd seen a man running toward the woods, but couldn't identify who it was. A police officer arrived at the scene shortly after the emergency call, but also found nothing. No sign of Brandon. No concrete clues as to what had happened to him. Just that empty vehicle, parked on the side of the road, and that eerie 911 call that no one could fully understand. And look, before I continue with this story that only gets more intriguing, I need to tell you something. If you're here watching so far, it's probably because real cases like this fascinate you as much as they fascinate me. And if this kind of content resonates with you, if you want to continue uncovering unsolved mysteries, unexplained disappearances, and stories we never forget, I invite you to join this community. Leave a comment below with what impacted you most so far in this story. Do you think Brandon was running away from someone? That he had a breakdown? Or that something much more sinister happened on that road? I read every comment and love exchanging ideas with you about these theories. And if you're enjoying the content, please give the video a like. This may seem like a small thing, but it makes a huge difference in helping this channel grow and reach more people who also love this kind of true story. Your participation here, whether with a comment, a like, or by subscribing to the channel, is what allows me to continue bringing stories like this every day. It's what keeps the space alive and growing. So if you're not already a subscriber, hit that subscribe button, because every day there's a new mystery waiting for you here. Now, back to Brandon Lawson's case. The search began immediately, and what happened in the following hours and days only made it all the more confusing and disturbing. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because to understand what happened that night, we first need to understand who Brandon Lawson was. And that's precisely where this case becomes even more disturbing. Because Brandon wasn't someone involved in the criminal world. He wasn't someone with a dark past full of dangerous secrets. He was, by every definition, an ordinary guy. And perhaps that's exactly what makes his disappearance so haunting. Because if it can happen to someone like him, it can happen to any of us. Brandon was 26 years old when he disappeared. He was a father of 4, working hard to support his family, and living a life many people do too. He had his challenges, of course, as everyone does. He wasn't perfect. He had financial troubles from time to time, and had had some drug issues in the past, but nothing that put him in a situation of extreme risk. Nothing that would make anyone look at him and think, this guy is going to disappear out of nowhere one day. He was simply a man trying to make the best of the hand life had dealt him. The hidden truth behind many mysterious disappearances is that they don't just happen to people living on the edge, in dangerous situations, or in hostile environments. They happen to ordinary people, in ordinary moments, making decisions any of us would make. And that's one of the most terrifying things about Brandon Lawson's case. There was nothing in his journey up to that point that indicated something so bizarre and inexplicable was about to happen. Brandon lived in San Angelo, Texas, with his wife Ledessa and their children. They had a relationship like so many others, with ups and downs, good times and bad, occasional arguments and reconciliations. On the night of August 9th, 2013, Brandon and Ledessa had one of those arguments. Nothing violent, nothing out of the ordinary, just a domestic dispute like thousands that happen every day in homes around the world. But the decision Brandon made at that moment, the decision to leave home and drive to his father's to clear his head, was a turning point that changed everything. He got into his truck around midnight and began driving toward Crowley, where his father lived. It was about 100 miles along Highway 277, a road that cuts through isolated desert regions of Texas. It wasn't the first time Brandon had made this journey. It was a familiar path, a route he'd traveled before. There was nothing strange or dangerous about the decision, at least not on the surface. He was just a man driving in the middle of the night, trying to get his head together after a fight with his wife. How many people have done that in their lives? But the impact of that decision was devastating, because somewhere along that road, between San Angelo and Crowley, something happened. Something that turned a simple nighttime drive into one of Texas' greatest unsolved mysteries. And the most disturbing part is that to this day, with all the technology available, with all the investigations conducted, with all the attention the case has received over the years, no one can explain what really happened to Brandon Lawson. What we do know is that around 12:54 a.m., Brandon called his brother Kyle. He said his truck had run out of gas and was stranded on the shoulder of Highway 277 near Bronte. He asked his brother for help, who promptly said he would drive over to get some fuel. Nothing about the call seemed alarming. It was just a normal call for help, the kind anyone would make if stranded in the middle of the road. Kyle said it would take about 30 to 40 minutes to get there. Brandon said it was okay, that he would wait, but something changed dramatically in the following minutes. Because at 12:58 in the morning, just 4 minutes after calling his brother, Brandon placed a call to 911, the emergency services. And this connection is where things start to get really strange. Brandon's voice on the recording sounds desperate, breathless, as if he's running. He can barely form complete sentences. The audio is garbled, there's a lot of background noise, and to this day, experts debate exactly what he said on that call. The consensus seems to be that he asked for help, mentioned something about being near Highway 277 in Bronte, and said he needed a police officer. But the rest of the call is a puzzle of words that are difficult to decipher. Some people have analyzed the audio where they hear Brandon say things like, "They're chasing me. They pushed my car off the road. There's a guy here. I ran into the woods." Others hear completely different things. Some say he mentions drugs. Others think he's talking about an accident. The truth is, no one knows for sure. But there's one thing virtually everyone agrees they heard. At some point during that chaotic, desperate call, Brandon said he wasn't alone. Those 3 words completely changed the narrative of this case. Because if he wasn't alone, who was with him? And why did he seem so terrified? This revelation transformed what could have been a simple case of accident or voluntary flight into something much more sinister and troubling. The 911 operator tried to understand what was happening, but the call was so confusing that she couldn't get clear information. The call lasted less than a minute and a half and ended abruptly. Police were dispatched to the scene immediately. An officer arrived at Brandon's truck about 50 minutes after the call, but when he arrived, no one was there. The vehicle was empty. The keys were inside. Brandon's belongings were there, but he had simply disappeared. Kyle, Brandon's brother, also arrived at the scene shortly after with fuel. He called Brandon's cell phone several times, but no one answered. He searched the area and shouted his brother's name, but got no response. A truck driver who had stopped to help said he saw a man running toward the bushes near the road, but couldn't identify who it was. No one saw Brandon after that. And this is the part that moves anyone who knows this story. An ordinary man on an ordinary day, making an ordinary decision, simply vanishes into thin air without a trace. The transformation of an ordinary night into an inexplicable nightmare happened in a matter of minutes. And to this day, no one knows what really happened on that dark Texas road. Comment there. This doesn't make sense. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the hidden truth about what happened that night can only be understood when we put each piece in its right place, each detail in the exact order it occurred. And the more you delve into the chronology of that night, the more you realize that a series of small decisions, seemingly insignificant moments, combine in an almost impossible to believe way to create the perfect scenario for a disappearance that no one can explain. Let's go back to the beginning of that night. August 9th, 2013. It was a typical Friday in Texas, and Brandon Lawson was home with his wife Ledessa and their children in San Angelo. The day had been normal, nothing out of the ordinary, just another day in the journey of a family man trying to balance work, bills, responsibilities, and the daily challenges we all face. But that evening, things started to get tense between Brandon and Ledessa. They fought, the kind of fight couples have when the pressures of life get a little too much. It wasn't violent. There was no physical aggression, but it was a kind of fight that left the atmosphere heavy, charged, and uncomfortable. And it was at that moment that Brandon made a decision that would change everything. He decided he needed to get out of there, breathe, and get his head together. He decided he would drive to his father's house, which lived in Crowley, nearly 200 miles away. It was a decision thousands of people made every day, leaving the house after a fight to clear their heads. There was nothing unusual about it, nothing that suggested that decision would be the last time his family would see him. Around 12:30 a.m., Brandon grabbed the keys to his Ford truck, said a quick goodbye, and left the house. Ledessa stood there, probably expecting him to return in a few hours, or at least call when he got to his father's house. She couldn't have imagined that this would be the last time she'd see her husband. At that moment, it was just another marital dispute that would be resolved the next day, like so many others before. Brandon took Highway 277, a road that cuts through the Texas countryside in an extremely isolated region. If you've never driven on Texas country roads at night, let me explain. It's not like driving on city roads or even busy highways. It's a different kind of solitude. You can drive for miles and miles without seeing a single car, without seeing a single light other than your own headlights. The darkness there is deep, dense, almost palpable. There are no street lights, no open businesses, practically nothing but asphalt, desert, and dark sky. And it was on this road, in the midst of this absolute darkness, that Brandon's truck began to have problems. It was running low on fuel. He had left home without checking to see if he had enough for the entire trip, and now he was paying the price for that decision. The vehicle began to sputter, losing power, until it finally came to a complete stop. Brandon managed to pull over to the shoulder near mile marker 267 on Highway 277. near the small town of Bronte, Texas. There he was, alone, in the middle of the night, on a deserted road with no gas, no reliable cell phone signal. The scenario was about the impact a simple mechanical failure can have when it happens in the wrong place, at the wrong time. Anyone who's ever been stranded in the middle of a deserted road at night knows the feeling. That mix of frustration, worry, and a hint of fear, because you're vulnerable there, exposed, depending on the luck of someone passing by and being able to help, or being able to call for help. Brandon tried calling on his cell phone, but the signal was very weak. The area was known for its unstable cell phone coverage. He managed, with some difficulty, to call his brother Kyle. It was exactly 12:54 in the morning. On the call, Brandon sounded calm, only frustrated by the situation. He explained that his car had run out of gas and was stranded on Highway 277, near Bronte. He asked his brother to bring him some fuel. Kyle, without hesitation, said he would drive over. He estimated it would take between 30 and 40 minutes to get there. Brandon said he would wait right there by the truck. But then something changed. Something happened in those next few minutes that completely transformed the situation. And this is where the story stops being just about a car that ran out of gas and becomes one of the most disturbing and inexplicable cases you'll ever hear. Because just 4 minutes after calling his brother, Brandon made that desperate call to 911. And what happened in those 4 minutes is a mystery no one has been able to solve to this day. Think about it. For minutes, 240 seconds. What can happen in such a short time that makes someone go from, okay, I'll wait here, to, I need urgent help, I'm not alone, I'm running? What kind of transformation of scenario happens in less than 5 minutes that leaves someone in utter despair? This is one of the questions that most haunts those who study this case. At 12:58 in the morning, the Coke County Emergency Dispatcher received Brandon's call. The dispatcher answered, expecting a normal call for help, perhaps a car accident, perhaps someone in need of a tow truck. But what she heard was a desperate, breathless, confused voice. Brandon could barely form complete sentences. There was background noise, strange sounds, and the distinct sensation that he was moving quickly, probably running. The dispatcher tried to calm Brandon, tried to understand where he was and what was happening, but his responses were fragmented and difficult to understand. He mentioned Highway 277, mentioned that he needed a police officer, but the rest was a jumble of words that even the best audio experts couldn't decipher with absolute certainty. The call lasted about 1 minute and 20 seconds and ended abruptly. The dispatcher tried calling back several times, but no one answered. Police were immediately dispatched to the scene. A county safety officer was assigned to investigate the call. Meanwhile, Kyle was also on his way with fuel. But when they both arrived at the scene, about 50 minutes after that distressing call, what they found was an empty and disturbing scene. Brandon's truck was there, parked on the shoulder, the keys still inside, his personal belongings still in the vehicle. But Brandon had simply disappeared. Kyle shouted his brother's name repeatedly. He searched the surrounding area, shining his cell phone flashlight into bushes, and walked along the road, hoping to find Brandon walking back. But there was no sign of him. The officer also searched the immediate area, but found nothing. It was as if Brandon had vanished into thin air on that dark, silent Texas road. A truck driver who had stopped at the scene shortly before the officer arrived mentioned seeing a man running toward the bushes on the side of the road, but he couldn't identify whether it was Brandon or someone else. This information only made things even more confusing. Who was that man? Was Brandon running from something? Was someone chasing Brandon? Or was it just a random detail, unrelated to the case? What we know for sure is that night, in a matter of minutes, a man who was simply waiting for his brother's help transformed into someone desperately crying out for help and then disappeared without a clear trace. The most disturbing revelation is that to this day, with all the searches, all the investigations, all the technology available, no one knows what happened to Brandon Lawson in those final minutes before he disappeared. Right there, where the answers. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the call Brandon made to 911 that early morning is undoubtedly the most intriguing and disturbing piece of this entire puzzle. This audio recording, just over a minute long, has become one of the most analyzed, debated, and investigated records in the recent history of missing persons cases in the United States. And the more you listen, The more you try to decipher what Brandon was saying in those final moments, the more you realize that the hidden truth behind those words may hold the key to understanding what really happened to him. The audio was recorded by the Coke County Emergency Dispatch at 12:58 a.m. on August 10, 2013. The dispatcher answered the call in the usual manner, expecting clear information about the location and nature of the emergency. But from the first second, it was clear this was no ordinary call. Brandon's voice was slurred. He sounded like he was running, panting, and there was a lot of background noise that made it difficult to understand. It was as if he were outdoors, moving quickly over uneven terrain, possibly among bushes or vegetation. The dispatcher asked what the emergency was, and Brandon's answer was confusing from the start. He mentioned Highway 277 and said he was near Bronte, Texas, but his words jumbled together in a way that made it difficult to understand exactly what he was trying to communicate. And this is where the debate that persists to this day begins. Because depending on who's listening to the audio, how many times you listen, and even the equipment used to play the recording, you can interpret Brandon's words in completely different ways. Some investigators who analyze the audio swear they hear Brandon clearly say, "We need a police officer here." The word need is interesting because it implies he wasn't alone, that there were other people with him at the time. But who were these people? Were they friends who showed up to help? Were they strangers he encountered on the road? Or were they people who posed some kind of threat? This simple word opened up a huge range of possibilities and theories. In another part of the call, many people who analyze the audio believe they heard something like "push into gutter" or "knock me off the road." If this interpretation is correct, it would suggest that Brandon was involved in some kind of physical confrontation, that someone had forced him or his vehicle off the main road. But this theory raises even more questions. Who did it? Why? Had Brandon gotten himself into a dangerous situation without realizing it? Or had he witnessed something he shouldn't have? There's also a moment in the audio where Brandon appears to say something related to running through the woods or running through the bushes. This phrase, if indeed he said it, indicates he abandoned the vehicle and was fleeing on foot over uneven terrain. The area around Highway 277 in that area is primarily Texas desert scrub, with some scattered bushes and trees. It's not the kind of terrain easy to traverse in the dark, especially without a flashlight or proper equipment. The impact of this decision to run could have been fatal, given the environmental conditions. But here's the part that really gets everyone familiar with this case. Even forensic audio experts can't agree on what Brandon actually said on that call. Dozens of professional analyses have been conducted using cutting-edge equipment, sound isolation techniques, noise filtering, and specific frequency amplification. And yet, interpretations vary dramatically. Some experts think they hear Brandon mentioning drugs. Others think he's talking about an accident. And still others believe he's describing a chase. This lack of absolute clarity is both a blessing and a curse for the investigation. On the one hand, it keeps the case open to new interpretations and possibilities. On the other, it makes it nearly impossible to establish with certainty what Brandon was trying to communicate in those final moments. The quest to decipher this audio had become almost an obsession for many amateur and professional investigators around the world. One of the most debated lines, which appears in virtually every analysis of the audio, is when Brandon appears to say, "I'm not alone." These words are relatively clear in the recording and are corroborated by the fact that he also said something similar to his brother Kyle on another call. The revelation that Brandon wasn't alone completely changes the dynamics of the case. If he was accompanied, all theories of an isolated accident or voluntary flight need to be reevaluated. Someone was with him, either to help or to harm. Some investigators believe the presence of others explains the desperation in Brandon's voice. Perhaps he had encountered dangerous individuals on the road. Perhaps he had witnessed something illegal, like a drug-related encounter or smuggling, and the people involved didn't want witnesses. This region of Texas, though remote, is not immune to criminal activity, drug trafficking, illegal transportation goods, and even more serious crimes have been reported in isolated areas like this. Other experts argue that Brandon could have been under the influence of substances that altered his perception of reality. He had a history of methamphetamine use in the past, and while there's no concrete evidence that he was under the influence on the night of his disappearance, this possibility has never been completely ruled out. If he was in an altered state of consciousness, it could explain the confusion on the phone call. the disconcerting phrases, and even the decision to run into the woods for no apparent reason. The transformation of a controllable situation into a chaotic emergency could be the result of a drug-induced psychotic episode, but some completely disagree with this theory. Brandon's family insists he was sober that night, that he had called home earlier and seemed completely normal. Kyle also claims in the call he received from his brother, minutes before the 911 call, Brandon sounded perfectly lucid, only frustrated that his car was out of gas. How does someone go from completely sober and rational to seemingly in a complete panic in a matter of minutes? The 911 operator, in her report, described trying repeatedly to get clear information from Brandon about his exact location and the nature of the emergency, but he seemed unable to provide coherent details. She mentioned that the call was heavily noisy and that Brandon seemed to be constantly moving, making communication even more difficult. After about a minute and 20 seconds, the call abruptly ended. The dispatcher tried to return the call multiple times, but no one answered. What happened in the moments immediately after that call is another mystery. Brandon simply stopped responding. His phone remained on for a few hours, but no one could reach him again. The device eventually shut down, either from low battery or because it was intentionally turned off. To this day, Brandon Lawson's last known communication with anyone is that confused and desperate call to emergency services. Authorities released the audio publicly a few years after the disappearance, hoping someone might hear something they had missed, some detail that could provide a clue to Brandon's whereabouts. The decision to release the audio generated a massive wave of interest in the case. Thousands of people around the world listened to the recording, offered their own interpretations, and created elaborate theories about what Brandon was saying and what might have happened to him. Online communities dedicated to solving unsolved mysteries poured over every second of that audio. Entire forums were created just to discuss Brandon's words. Some users claimed to have isolated complete sentences that no one else had heard. Others created detailed word-for-word transcripts, though these transcripts often contradicted each other. The collective search of the truth became almost as fascinating as the mystery itself. But despite all this collective effort, despite all the technology applied, despite years of analysis and debate, there is still no consensus on what Brandon Lawson actually said on that desperate call. And there may never be. Audio remains one of the most frustrating and intriguing pieces of evidence in any modern missing person case. Every word, every background sound, every pause in Brandon's speech may hold the answer everyone seeks. Or it may simply be the chaotic recording of a panicked man, unable to clearly communicate the danger he faced. Comment there. I need to hear this audio. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because there's one specific phrase Brandon said, both during the 911 call and in a conversation with his brother Kyle, that completely changed the course of the entire investigation. 3 simple words that transformed what could have been seen as an accident or a willful escape into something much darker and more complex. Those words were, "I'm not alone." And the impact of that statement reverberates to this day in all theories about what really happened to Brandon Lawson that night. Let's consider the context here. Brandon had called his brother for help because his car had run out of gas. Until that moment, he seemed alone on the road, just waiting for help. But somewhere between that first call and the desperate call to 911, something changed dramatically. And when Kyle finally arrived at the scene and accessed Brandon's phone, he discovered that his brother had left a voicemail clearly stating he wasn't alone. This immediate revelation raised the most obvious and terrifying question. If he wasn't alone, who was with him? The first theory that naturally arises is the most disturbing. Brandon was being followed. Perhaps he had encountered dangerous people on that isolated road. Texas, especially in remote regions like the one near Bronte, has a documented history of criminal activity related to drug trafficking. Transport routes for methamphetamine and other illegal substances often run along back roads, precisely because there is less police surveillance and fewer witnesses. Consider the mindset of someone involved in this type of crime. If you're transporting drugs or conducting some illegal operation and suddenly see a car stop on the side of the road, with someone potentially watching or even recording what's happening, what would your reaction be? You'd probably view that person as a threat, as someone who needs to be silenced to protect the operation. This theory suggests that Brandon may have witnessed something he shouldn't have, and the people involved decided he couldn't be left alive to tell the story. Some investigators believe this is the most plausible explanation. The region where Brandon disappeared is relatively close to the Mexican border, and there are records of cartel activity in that area. If Brandon, by chance, ended up stopping at a meeting point used for illegal transactions, he may have become an unwanted witness. Turning a simple car breakdown into a life-threatening situation would be a matter of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But there's another layer to this theory. Some people who knew Brandon have mentioned that he had a history of methamphetamine use in the past. Although the family insists he was clean at the time of his disappearance, some investigators raise the possibility that Brandon still had connections to people involved in the drug world. Did he owe someone money? Did he have information about criminal operations that someone wanted to keep secret? This line of thinking suggests that the roadside encounter wasn't completely random, but rather the result of decisions and connections from earlier in Brandon's life. But let's explore another possibility that also makes sense when we analyze all the details. What if Brandon actually encountered someone on that road, but that person was initially there to help? The trucker who stopped at the scene mentioned seeing a man running, but couldn't identify who it was. There were also reports that another vehicle had been seen in the area that night. Is it possible that Brandon accepted help from a stranger, got into that person's vehicle, and then realized he was in danger? This theory suggests that Brandon's journey took an unexpected turn when he trusted the wrong person. Perhaps the stranger who stopped to help had bad intentions from the start. Perhaps the situation started innocently and then degenerated into something violent. The hidden truth here may be that Brandon only sensed he was in danger when it was too late to escape, which is why he made a desperate call saying he wasn't alone and that he needed a police officer. Now, there's also a completely different theory that some behavioral experts consider viable. Brandon was high on drugs, and the people he mentioned didn't even exist. Methamphetamine is known to cause severe paranoia, hallucinations, and psychotic episodes, especially in chronic users or those going through withdrawal. If Brandon had recently used methamphetamine or was going through withdrawal, he might have genuinely believed people were stalking him, when in fact he was alone the entire time. This explanation will align with the garbled audio of the 911 call, the baffling phrases, and the seemingly irrational decision to run into the desert in the middle of the night. Under the influence of drug-induced paranoia, Brandon may have seen threats where none existed, interpreted normal sounds of pursuit, and gone into a complete panic for no apparent reason. In this scenario, he would have run into the woods, gotten lost in the dark, and eventually succumbed to the elements or suffered some fatal accident that left his body in a location where it was never found. But Brandon's family vehemently rejects this theory. His wife, Ledessa, insists that Brandon was sober that night. She says they had a normal discussion, that Brandon was completely lucid when he left the house, and that there were no signs of drug use. Kyle also claims that the initial call he received from his brother showed no signs of mental alteration or paranoia. Brandon was simply frustrated because his car had run out of gas. So what changed in a matter of minutes? How does someone go from perfectly normal to seemingly terrified so quickly? That's the question that haunts everyone who studies this case. Unless something truly traumatic and threatening happened in those few minutes between the two calls, it's difficult to explain the dramatic transformation in Brandon's behavior. There's also a less discussed but equally intriguing theory. Brandon encountered someone he knew on the road. Perhaps it wasn't a stranger, but rather someone from his past, someone with whom he had some kind of history or unresolved conflict. In this scenario, "I'm not alone" would have a different connotation. It wouldn't necessarily be a cry for help or a declaration of immediate danger, but rather a way of communicating that the situation was more complicated than it seemed. Some investigators have explored the possibility that Brandon had arranged to meet someone that night, perhaps related to drugs or some other transaction. The fight with his wife could have been a convenient excuse to leave the house. But this theory has its problems. If Brandon had planned to meet someone, why would he call his brother for help with gas? Why would he make an emergency call to 911? These actions don't make sense if he was voluntarily with someone. What we know for sure is that the words, "I'm not alone," confirm that there was at least one other person involved in what happened to Brandon that night. Whether that person was a real threat, a help-returned assailant, or even a hallucination, they were significant enough that Brandon felt the need to explicitly mention them. And this unidentified presence is likely the key to solving the entire mystery. Revelations emerging from behind the scenes of the investigation suggest that police considered all these possibilities. They investigated Brandon's drug connections, looked for enemies or people with whom he had conflicts, and analyzed cell phone records to see if he had been in contact with anyone the night before his disappearance. But none of these lines of inquiry produced enough concrete evidence to confirm any specific theory. What makes it all the more frustrating is that if there was someone else involved, they never came forward. No one came forward to police saying, "I was with Brandon that night," or "I saw what happened to him." The silence of this unknown person is deafening, and that silence could mean many things. It could mean the person has something to hide, that they're involved in Brandon's disappearance. It could mean the person doesn't even know they're wanted, that they left the area before it all happened. Or it could mean that Brandon was truly alone, and the people he mentioned existed only in his troubled mind. Right there. Who was with him? Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what happened after Brandon's disappearance is as intriguing as the disappearance itself. The searches that were conducted, the resources mobilized, the discoveries made, and especially the things that were not found paint an even more complex and disturbing picture of the story. And every detail I'm about to share with you now only deepens a mystery rather than solving it. As soon as Kyle arrived at the scene and realized his brother was missing, he immediately contacted the authorities again. Local police, who had already been dispatched due to the 911 call, intensified their search efforts. A Coke County Sheriff Department officer arrived at Brandon's truck about 50 minutes after that desperate call, but found no one there. The vehicle was there, abandoned with the keys inside, but Brandon had simply vanished. The first hours of the search were critical. Anyone familiar with rescue operations knows that the first 24 hours are absolutely crucial in missing persons cases. That's when the person is still relatively close to their last known location, when physical clues are still fresh, and when the chances of finding someone alive are highest. And the authorities knew this. They wasted no time. At dawn, search and rescue teams were mobilized. Dozens of volunteers from the local community joined the effort. People who didn't even know Brandon but were touched by his story and wanted to help. The transformation from a quiet road to a full-scale search operation was rapid. Helicopters were brought in to conduct aerial sweeps of the area. The hope was that, from above, they could identify something that wasn't visible from the ground: a body, clothing, any sign of Brandon's presence. The helicopters flew over miles and miles of desert terrain surrounding Highway 277. The region is vast, open, and sparsely vegetated, which theoretically should make it easy to locate someone. But the Texas desert is deceptive. There are depressions in the terrain, small valleys, and rocky areas where someone could have fallen and been hidden from view. The pilots meticulously searched every square meter of the suspected area, but found nothing. Meanwhile, on the ground, sniffer dogs were brought in to try to track Brandon's scent. These dogs are specifically trained to detect human scent and follow trails even in difficult conditions. A piece of Brandon's clothing was used to provide the dogs with the necessary olfactory reference. And initially, the dogs seemed to find something. They followed a trail leading from the truck toward the nearby bushes, exactly in the direction the trucker had mentioned seeing someone running. The dogs followed this trail for a few hundred meters, winding through undergrowth and rocks. The search teams followed, hoping they would finally find Brandon, perhaps injured, perhaps disoriented, but alive. But at a certain point, the dogs simply lost the trail. It was as if Brandon had vanished into thin air. The dogs circled the area repeatedly, trying to recover the scent, but were unsuccessful. It was as if the trail ended abruptly at that specific point, with no logical explanation. This revelation left investigators perplexed. How can an older trail simply disappear in the middle of nowhere? Several theories were put forward. Perhaps Brandon had gotten into a vehicle at that point, which would explain why the scent didn't continue. Perhaps he had reached a rocky area where the scent didn't linger so easily. Or perhaps something more sinister had happened there, something that completely interrupted his journey. Volunteers participating in the ground search spent days sifting through vegetation, peering into every bush, checking every depression in the ground, turning over rocks, searching for anything that might be a clue. They found trash, objects discarded by travelers over the years, even some animal bones that initially raised alarm, but nothing that belonged to Brandon. It was as if he had been erased from existence. The truck driver who had stopped to help that night was interviewed extensively by police. He described seeing the truck stopped on the shoulder and deciding to stop to see if anyone needed help. When he approached the vehicle, he saw a man running toward the bushes. The truck driver shouted, offering help, but the man didn't respond and continued running. He couldn't see the man's face clearly because of the darkness and distance. This witness was crucial, but also frustrating. The trucker couldn't confirm with absolute certainty that the man he saw was Brandon. He couldn't say if there were other people in the area. He hadn't seen any other vehicles. His witness added a piece to the puzzle, but it didn't solve anything. It merely confirmed that someone was moving quickly away from the road at that time, which was consistent with the 911 call. The emotional toll on search teams was palpable. The longer Brandon was found, the more hope of finding him alive diminished. After days of intensive searching, the operation was scaled back. The helicopter crews were dismissed. The volunteers gradually returned to their normal lives, and the case began to be treated as a long-term disappearance rather than an active rescue operation. But Brandon's family never gave up. Kyle, his brother, organized multiple independent searches over the years. He returned to that stretch of Highway 277 dozens of times, hiking through the desert, searching for any clues that the official searchers might have missed. Ladessa, his wife, kept the story alive on social media, sharing photos of Brandon, reminding people that he was still missing, and asking anyone with information to contact them. And then, years after Brandon's disappearance, something happened that initially seemed like the outcome everyone feared, but turned out to be just another layer of mystery. In 2020, construction workers in an area near where Brandon disappeared found human remains. The discovery immediately sparked speculation that they had finally found Brandon Lawson. The news spread quickly. The family was notified and went through an emotional roller coaster. On the one hand, the possibility of finally having answers, of being able to give Brandon a proper burial, of closing that horrible chapter. On the other, the definitive confirmation that he was dead, that there was no longer any hope of finding him alive, that the children would grow up without ever seeing their father again. It was an agonizing wait while the remains were analyzed and identified. But when the DNA test results finally came back, they yielded a shocking conclusion. The remains weren't those of Brandon Lawson. They belonged to someone else, an unidentified man who had also disappeared in the area under unknown circumstances. The discovery raised disturbing questions. How many people disappear in that area without anyone knowing? Is there something particularly dangerous about that particular region of Texas? Or was it pure coincidence that another body was found so close to where Brandon disappeared? This revelation was devastating for the family for various reasons. Instead of answers, they were left with more questions. Instead of closure, they were left with renewed uncertainty. And worst of all, confirmation that parts of that desert hide deadly secrets, that people can disappear there and never be found. Even years later, despite extensive searches, authorities never found Brandon's cell phone, never found his wallet, never found any of his personal belongings other than what was inside his truck. It's as if he walked into that desert and was completely absorbed by it. The hidden truth of what happened that night remains buried somewhere between the thorn bushes and the red Texas earth. Investigators revisited the case multiple times over the years, applying new technologies as they became available. More sophisticated analysis of the audio from the 911 call, reviewing cell phone records to see if other towers had picked up Brandon's cell phone signal, even using drones equipped with thermal cameras to sweep the area. But each new effort ended in the same place. No concrete answers. Comment there, he's somewhere. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because after analyzing all the facts, all the evidence, and all the testimonies, we've reached the point where we need to confront the theories about what really happened to Brandon Lawson that night. And the truth is, there are multiple possible explanations, each with its own merits and problems, each painting a completely different picture of what may have been his ultimate fate. What I'll do now is present these theories honestly and balancedly, because none of them have been proven and perhaps never will be. The first theory, and perhaps the most widely accepted by many investigators, is that Brandon suffered some kind of fatal accident and his body was simply never found. Consider the situation. He was on a deserted road in the middle of the night, apparently panicked for some reason, and ran into the Texas desert without any preparation. The terrain there is anything but friendly. There are ravines, holes, unstable rocky areas, and thorny vegetation that could seriously injure someone running in the dark. The mindset of someone in panic is not rational. When you're desperate, running from something real or imagined, you're not thinking about safety. You're not planning your steps. You're not assessing risks. You simply run. And in this state, it's entirely possible that Brandon tripped, fell into a ravine, hit his head on a rock, or suffered some other fatal injury. If he fell into a depression in the ground, especially at night, his body could easily be hidden from view even by search teams during the day. The desert has a way of hiding things. Vegetation can quickly grow over objects, sand and dust can cover evidence, and wild animals can scatter remains. It's not uncommon for bodies to remain undiscovered for years or even decades in desert regions, even after extensive searches. This theory would explain why all searches have failed to locate Brandon, why there's no evidence of violent crime, why there are no witnesses to a confrontation or kidnapping. But there's a second theory that can't be ignored, especially considering Brandon's past, drug or criminal involvement. As mentioned earlier, Brandon had a history of methamphetamine use. Although his family insists he was clean at the time of his disappearance, some investigators believe he may still have connections to the drug world, either as a user or as someone who owed money. The impact of drug addiction on a person's life goes far beyond the use itself. It creates debt, creates dangerous relationships, and puts you in contact with people who operate outside the law and who don't hesitate to use violence to solve problems. If Brandon was still involved in this world in some way, it's possible his disappearance wasn't accidental. It could have been a result of an unpaid debt, a transaction gone wrong, or someone who saw Brandon as a threat or a risk. This theory would suggest that the people Brandon mentioned being with him that night were individuals linked to crime. Perhaps he had arranged to meet there, perhaps they had followed him, or perhaps it was pure coincidence that he happened to stop at a location used for illegal activities. In any case, if this theory is correct, Brandon's body may have been intentionally hidden or disposed in a way that made it difficult to find. People involved in the drug trade know how to make bodies disappear, but there are details that don't quite fit this narrative. If Brandon was willingly involved in a drug-related situation, why would he call his brother for help with gas? Why would he make a frantic call to 911 asking for a police officer? These actions don't make sense if he was knowingly participating in something illegal, unless the situation spiraled out of control in a way he didn't expect, turning from a seemingly simple transaction into something violent and threatening. The third theory is particularly disturbing and aligns with what Brandon said in the emergency call. He witnessed something he shouldn't have. The area where he disappeared, while remote, isn't completely isolated from criminal activity. Drug trafficking routes pass through there, and there are documented records of illegal operations in that area of Texas. It's possible that Brandon, by pure bad luck, stopped his truck exactly where something was happening that he shouldn't have witnessed. Imagine his journey that night from the perspective of someone conducting an illegal operation. You're in the middle of a major transaction, transferring drugs or money, hoping not to be seen or interrupted. Suddenly, a vehicle appears stopped on the shoulder of the road with someone inside. This person could be watching everything, recording, or even an undercover police informant. The decision to eliminate this potential witness would be almost automatic for people involved in serious crimes. This theory would explain the desperate tone of Brandon's call, why he said he wasn't alone, and why he seemed to be running and panicking. If he realized he'd seen something dangerous and that the people involved had noticed him, he'd have every reason to be terrified. A simple car breakdown could have escalated into a life-threatening situation in a matter of seconds. And if these people captured him, either to question him about what he saw or simply to silence him, his body could have been transported far away and disposed of in a completely different location. But there's a fourth theory that, while less discussed, deserves consideration. Brandon was experiencing some sort of psychological crisis or dissociative episode, possibly drug-related, and ended up getting lost or hurt while in an altered state of mind. Methamphetamine is known to cause severe paranoia, hallucinations, and erratic behavior. If Brandon was high or in withdrawal, he may have genuinely believed he was being stalked when he wasn't. In this scenario, the people he mentioned didn't exist. The threat was a product of his altered mind. He ran into the desert, fleeing imaginary dangers, and in the process got lost, suffered an accident, or succumbed to the elements. The hidden truth here would be that there was no crime, no confrontation, just a man battling his own inner demons on a night that ended in tragedy. But this theory also has significant problems. The family insists that Brandon was sober, and his brother Kyle didn't notice anything unusual during the initial call. Furthermore, the truck driver testified to seeing someone running, suggesting that there was at least one person physically present in the area. If Brandon was hallucinating, it would be a remarkable coincidence that his hallucinations corresponded exactly to the moment a real witness saw someone running. There's also a less popular theory, but one that some consider voluntary escape. Did Brandon deliberately decide to disappear, start a new life elsewhere, leave behind his responsibilities, his debts, his problems? People do it. It's not common, but it happens. The call to 911 could have been theatrical, a way to create confusion and give the impression that something terrible had happened, when in fact he was simply running away. But this theory doesn't hold up, well, when you look behind the scenes of Brandon's life. He had 4 children he loved, a wife with whom, despite their problems, he maintained a relationship, and there was no indication that he planned to abandon his family. Furthermore, disappearing completely in the modern world is extremely difficult. You need money, documents, a place to go. Brandon had no significant financial resources, no passport, and no suspicious activity in his bank accounts before his disappearance. What makes this case so frustrating is that each theory has elements that make sense, but also gaps that can't be easily explained. It's like putting together a puzzle where some pieces just don't fit no matter how hard you try. The final revelation of what happened to Brandon Lawson remains shrouded in mystery because there isn't enough physical evidence to definitively confirm or rule out any of these possibilities. Investigators continue to keep the case open, remain receptive to new information, and continue to hope that one day someone will come forward with the missing piece. But with each passing year, the chances of solving this mystery diminish. Witnesses forget details, physical evidence deteriorates, and the truth becomes increasingly elusive. Comment here. Which theory makes more sense? Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because so far we've talked about evidence, theories, investigations, and mysteries. But there's a side to this case that's easy to forget when you're focused on the technical details and the possibilities of what happened. The real people left behind. The family who woke up the day after that night and realized Brandon was never coming back. The lives that were completely transformed by this disappearance. Because behind every unsolved mystery, there's real pain, real loss, and real people trying to move on without the answers they desperately need. Let's start with Ledessa, Brandon's wife. The last interaction she had with her husband was that argument on the night of August 9th, a common fight, the kind that happens in thousands of relationships every day. She probably went to sleep that night thinking Brandon would return the next day, or at least call from his father's house to say everything was okay. She had no idea that that would be the last time she would see the man she had built a family with, the father of her children, the person with whom she shared her life. The emotional impact of discovering that someone you love has simply disappeared is devastating in a way that's difficult to describe to those who haven't experienced it. It's not like a death, where you have a body, a funeral, a grieving process that follows recognizable stages. It's an ambiguous loss, a special kind of torment where you don't know if the person's alive or dead, if they're suffering somewhere, or if they've already passed away. You constantly oscillate between hope and despair, between the belief that they'll return and the painful acceptance that they probably won't. Ledessa spent years living in this emotional limbo. She had to wake up every day and care for 4 children who constantly asked where their father was, when he would return. How do you explain to a small child that their father disappeared and no one knows where he is? How do you keep hope alive without creating false expectations? How do you move forward with your life when part of you is still stuck on that August night, waiting for answers that never come? Her journey was one of extraordinary resilience. She not only kept her family together, but also became a tireless voice in the search for Brandon. Ledessa used social media to keep the case alive, sharing photos, reminding people that Brandon was still missing, and asking anyone with information to contact her. She participated in interviews, spoke to reporters, and did everything in her power to ensure Brandon's name would not be forgotten. But the hidden truth is that doing so exacts an immense emotional toll. Each interview meant reliving the trauma. Each anniversary of the disappearance brought back all the emotions of that terrible night. Every false lead, every supposed sighting that led nowhere, every new theory that emerged only to be dismissed was like opening the wound again. And she did this repeatedly, year after year, because her love for Brandon and her desire to find answers were greater than the pain. And then there are Brandon's children. For children who were just beginning their lives when their father disappeared. They grew up without him. They missed out on all those fundamental experiences that define the father-son relationship. Brandon never saw his children graduate from school, never taught them to drive, never offered relationship advice, never was present for the big and small moments that build a family. The transformation of these children from young people with a present father to young people with no answers about what happened to him profoundly shaped who they became. Some of them were very young when Brandon disappeared and barely remember him. Their memories of their father come primarily from photos and stories told by others. Imagine growing up knowing your father only through preserved fragments, moments frozen in time, secondhand accounts. Elderly people carry real memories, but these memories are accompanied by tormenting questions. Why did he go out that night? What happened to him? Did he think about them in his final moments? Did he suffer? Is he still alive somewhere? These unanswered questions can haunt a person for a lifetime, shaping their mindset and affecting their very decisions about family and relationships. And then there's Kyle, Brandon's brother. The guilt he carries is something few can fully comprehend. He was the last person Brandon spoke to before he disappeared. He was the one Brandon called for help. And Kyle promised he'd come, bring gas, and fix the problem. He kept that promise. But by the time he got there, it was too late. Brandon was gone. Kyle blames himself for not getting there faster. He constantly relives those 40-minute drives, wondering what he could have done differently. What if he had left home immediately instead of preparing? What if he had driven faster? What if he had insisted that Brandon stay on the phone with him the entire trip? These what if questions are a particular kind of torture, because you can never change the past, but you can also never stop thinking about how things could have been different. Kyle became one of the most vocal advocates in the search for Brandon. He returned to that stretch of Highway 277 countless times, hiking through the desert, searching for anything that might be a clue. He organized independent searches, gathered volunteers, and spent hours under the scorching Texas sun sifting through the red earth in search of answers. He did this not only out of love for his brother, but also because he feels a deep sense of responsibility. Brandon called him that night, trusted him to help, and Kyle feels he failed. Behind the scenes of Kyle's life, there's a man struggling with the weight of complicated grief. He lost his brother, but he can't bury him. He has questions, but no one can answer them. He wants justice, but he doesn't know against whom or what. This emotional limbo can be paralyzing, affecting his mental health, his relationships, and his ability to move forward with his life. The entire family underwent a forced transformation. They had to learn to live with the ambiguity, the lack of closure, the permanent hole left by Brandon's absence. They had to find ways to celebrate his memory while still holding out hope that perhaps, somehow, he could still be found. It's an impossible balance that no one should have to face, but one that thousands of families of missing persons are forced to face. What makes this family's journey even more painful is the way the case was initially handled. There were times when they felt authorities didn't take the disappearance seriously enough, that the search was called off too soon, that theories about Brandon's drug involvement overshadowed his humanity and the urgency to find him. They had to fight not only the mystery of what happened, but also bureaucracy, limited resources, and the inevitable fact that unsolved cases eventually get pushed to the back burner when new ones emerge. LaDessa eventually had to make impossible decisions about how to move forward. How do you restart your life when you're technically still married, but your husband has been missing for years? How do you explain this to your children? How do you balance honoring the memory of someone who might still be alive somewhere with the practical need to build a stable life for your family? These are questions that have no right answers, just difficult choices that must be made day by day. The saddest revelation is that this family represents just one case among thousands. There are families all over the country, all over the world, experiencing the same reality of having someone disappear without explanation. Each case has its own unique details, but the pain, the confusion, the desperate desire for answers, this is universal. And as we discuss theories and analyze evidence, it's important to remember that these aren't just interesting stories or intellectual puzzles to solve. These are real lives, destroyed by circumstances we can never fully understand. The Lawson family continues to wait, waiting for a clue that leads to Brandon's body. waiting for someone to finally come forward with information, waiting for an unlikely miracle that he's still alive somewhere. But most of all, waiting for the one thing all families of missing persons crave more than anything: answers. Because without answers, there can be no closure. And without closure, the wound never truly heals. Right there, they deserve answers. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. Because even after all these years, even with all the pain and frustration the family has endured, Brandon Lawson's case remains officially open. And that means there's still movement. There are still people working behind the scenes trying to find answers. There are still developments that keep the hope alive that one day we might finally find out what happened that night in August 2013. In recent years, technology has advanced in ways unimaginable when Brandon disappeared. And some of these innovations have been applied to the case in the hope of uncovering clues that traditional methods have failed to detect. One of the most promising tools has been the use of drones equipped with high-resolution thermal cameras. These devices can cover vast areas of terrain much faster than ground-based teams and capture images from angles that would otherwise be impossible. Volunteers and private investigators have funded multiple drone operations in the area where Brandon disappeared. The transformation in how searches are conducted has been remarkable. Where once days of arduous labor were required, walking to the desert under the scorching sun, drones can now map square kilometers in a matter of hours. Thermal imaging cameras are especially useful because they can detect temperature differences in the ground, which could indicate something buried or covered by vegetation. But despite this impressive technology, the drone searches didn't yield the results everyone hoped for. They extensively mapped the area and identified some points of interest that were later investigated on the ground, but none of them led to Brandon. The hidden truth is that even the most advanced technology has its limitations. If Brandon's body is buried, covered by rocks, or in some deep natural cavity, even the best equipment may not be able to detect it. There was also a renewed effort to analyze the audio from the 911 call using more advanced sound processing software. Forensic audio experts applied filtering and amplification techniques that simply didn't exist in 2013. They tried to isolate Brandon's voice from background noise, amplify certain frequencies to make his words clearer, and even use artificial intelligence to reconstruct what he was saying. These analyses have yielded some interesting revelations. Some experts now believe they can hear the sounds of at least 2 different voices in the background of the call, in addition to Brandon's own. If true, it definitively confirms that he wasn't alone that night. But even with this advanced technology, there's still no absolute consensus on what Brandon said or who else was present. The audio remains frustratingly ambiguous, a puzzle that resists all attempts at a complete solution. In 2020, there was a moment of renewed hope when human remains were found in the region. As I mentioned before, DNA testing confirmed that it wasn't Brandon, but this discovery reignited public interest in the case. Journalists returned to covering the story, podcasts dedicated episodes to investigating the mystery, and a new generation of people who had never heard of Brandon Lawson were suddenly diving into the details of the case. This resurgence of attention had a significant impact. New potential witnesses came forward, people who were in the area that night but had never been interviewed before. Some of these witnesses provided information that, while not solving the case, helped fill in gaps in the night's chronology. For example, a motorist mentioned seeing a suspicious vehicle parked near where Brandon disappeared, something that had not been reported in the initial investigation. The family organized several additional searches over the years, some with dozens of volunteers, others with just a few close family members. Kyle, the brother, became almost obsessive in his search. He studied topographical maps of the region, identified areas that had not been fully explored in the initial searches, and spent countless hours walking to the desert trying to find any trace of his brother. One theory that has gained traction in recent years is that Brandon may have fallen into one of the many abandoned oil wells in that region of Texas. The oil industry has had a massive presence in Texas for over a century, and there are literally thousands of old wells, some dating back decades, that have been abandoned and not always properly sealed or marked. If Brandon was running in the dark, panicked, he could easily have tripped and fallen into one of these wells without even realizing he was there. This theory is particularly disturbing because abandoned oil wells can be extremely deep, and recovering someone or something from them is technically very difficult and expensive. There are documented cases of people and even animals falling into these wells and never being recovered simply because the rescue operation was too complex. If Brandon is in a well, it would perfectly explain why all cursory searches have failed to locate him. Investigators have mapped the location of known wells in the area, and some have been inspected, but the reality is that not all old wells are adequately documented. There may be wells that don't appear in any official records, drilled decades ago by companies that no longer exist. Finding and inspecting all possible wells would be a monumental task, requiring resources that simply aren't available. Local authorities keep the case open and remain receptive to new information. Periodically, when leads emerge or new technology becomes available, they revisit the case. But the reality is that with each passing year, with each clue that leads nowhere, the likelihood of solving the case diminishes. Not for lack of will or effort, but simply because evidence deteriorates, memories become less reliable, and the trail grows increasingly cold. Behind the scenes of the investigation, there are also frustrations with how the case was initially handled. Some critics argue that the first hours after the disappearance were not maximized as they should have been. Perhaps if more resources had been mobilized immediately, if the search had been more intensive from the beginning, Brandon might have been found. But it's easy to make these criticisms in retrospect. At the time, no one knew exactly what had happened, and decisions were made based on the information available at the time. What's indisputable is that this case has never been solved. Brandon Lawson is still officially missing. There's no body, no confirmation of death, no certainty about what happened that night. And this lack of resolution keeps the tension alive not only for the family, but for everyone around the world who knows the story and who, like me, are fascinated and disturbed by these mysteries that defy explanation. Recently, there has been discussion about using ground-penetrating radar technology in the area. This type of equipment can detect underground anomalies that may indicate buried objects or even bodies. It's an expensive technology that requires trained experts to interpret the results, but has been used successfully in other missing persons cases. The family is exploring funding options to make this possible because, after more than a decade, they're willing to try anything that might finally bring answers. There's also an ongoing effort to keep Brandon's story alive in the public consciousness. Social media pages dedicated to the case remain active, sharing updates, organizing awareness events, and maintaining pressure on authorities to ensure the case isn't forgotten. The mindset behind this effort is simple. The more people know about Brandon Lawson, the greater the chances that someone, somewhere, has crucial information that hasn't yet been shared. A number of private investigators have taken an interest in the case over the years and offer their services, sometimes free of charge, to try to solve the mystery. They brought fresh perspectives, asked previously unasked questions, and explored angles that have been overlooked. But even with this additional expertise, the case continues to elude resolution. The family's journey in search of answers has become a demonstration of extraordinary human resilience. More than a decade later, they still haven't given up. They still believe that one day they will have the answers they seek. This determination is inspiring, but also deeply saddening, because it represents more than 10 years living in limbo, more than 10 years without closure, more than 10 years of pain that has never been fully processed, because it cannot be while the mystery remains unsolved. Comment there. Never give up. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because when you stop to think about everything that happened to Brandon Lawson, when you truly absorb the magnitude of this mystery, you realize that this case represents something much bigger than just a missing man. It touches on fundamental fears we all carry, raises questions about the fragility of our security, and forces us to confront the uncomfortable fact that there are things in this world we simply cannot explain, no matter how hard we try. Brandon Lawson entered the darkness of that Texas Highway 1 August night in 2013 and never returned. Consider the terrifying simplicity of that statement. A man driving on a highway, doing something millions of people do every day, simply disappeared. There was nothing extraordinary about that night until the moment everything became extraordinary. And this transformation from ordinary to inexplicable happened in a matter of minutes, perhaps even seconds. Brandon's last known words continue to echo more than a decade later. "I'm not alone." 3 words loaded with meaning. 3 words that completely changed the narrative of what happened. But who was with him that night? That's the million-dollar question. The one no one has been able to answer satisfactorily. Was it someone who came to help and then became a threat? Was it someone involved in criminal activity who saw Brandon as an unwanted witness? Was it a past acquaintance with whom he had some unresolved history? Or were they figures who existed only in the troubled mind of someone under the influence of drugs? The hidden truth is that we may never know the answer, and this uncertainty is what makes this case so haunting. We, as human beings, have a deep need to understand, to categorize, to find patterns and explanations. When we encounter something that resists all attempt at comprehension, it stirs something fundamental in our psyche. It makes us question our own security, our own understanding of how the world works. The impact of this case goes beyond Brandon's family. It affected the entire community of Bronte and San Angelo. It affected the search teams who spent days searching for him. It affected the investigators who dedicated years trying to solve the mystery. And it affected thousands, perhaps millions of people around the world who heard this story and became obsessed with it, trying to understand what happened that night. Why was Brandon never found? This is another question that haunts everyone familiar with the case. In an age of GPS, surveillance cameras, and digital records of virtually everything we do, how can someone simply vanish without a trace? The answer, disturbing as it may be, is that there are still places in this world where you can get completely lost. There are still areas remote enough, vast enough, inhospitable enough where nature can claim what is its own and hide secrets for decades or even centuries. The Texas desert is exactly that kind of place. It seems open and exposed when you're driving through it. But when you truly penetrate that landscape, when you walk among the bushes and rocks, you realize how easy it would be to get lost, how easy it would be for something or someone to remain hidden. The land there is hard, unforgiving, and doesn't yield its victims easily. But there's also the darker possibility that Brandon isn't in that desert at all, that he was transported to another location, that his body was hidden or disposed in a way that ensured it would never be found. If there were other people involved, if there was malicious intent, then the lack of physical evidence may not be accidental. It may be the result of deliberate decisions made by people who knew exactly what they were doing. The journey of trying to understand what happened to Brandon takes us to uncomfortable places. It forces us to confront the possibility that not every mystery has a solution, that not every story has a satisfying ending. We live in a culture fueled by narratives with beginning, middle, and end. We want resolution. We want closure. But the reality is that life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes, stories simply end midway, leaving questions that will never be answered. And perhaps that's precisely what makes Brandon Lawson's case so powerful and so disturbing. It challenges our need for resolution. It exists in that uncomfortable space between the known and the unknown, between life and death, between hope and despair. It's a constant reminder that no matter how much we advance technologically, no matter how much we think we have control over our environment and our destiny, there are still forces and circumstances beyond our comprehension and control. Imagine the mindset of someone on that road right now, passing the exact spot where Brandon disappeared. You look at the shoulder, at the surrounding bushes, and try to imagine what happened there. But no matter how hard you try, you'll never truly know. You're looking at a scene where something inexplicable has occurred, with a line between normal and supernatural, between explainable and absolute mystery, has been crossed in a way no one can decipher. The case teaches us something important about the fragility of human existence. Brandon wasn't doing anything extraordinarily risky that night. He wasn't climbing dangerous mountains. He was exploring deep caves. He wasn't knowingly putting himself in extreme danger. He was simply driving down a highway. And yet, he disappeared. This reminds us that the security we feel in everyday life is, to some extent, an illusion. That things can go wrong in ways we never imagined, at times when we least expect it. But there's also something deeply human in how people have responded to this case. The family's refusal to give up, the volunteers who keep searching, the investigators who can't let the case go, the thousands of people who keep Brandon's memory alive by sharing his story. This demonstrates our collective capacity for empathy, our desire to help, our need to find justice and truth even when it seems impossible. The revelations that emerge from studying cases like this go beyond the specific details. They tell us something about ourselves, about our society, about the systems we create to protect ourselves, which sometimes fail. They expose the cracks in our sense of order and control. They remind us that beneath the surface of everyday life lies a world of uncertainty and mystery. Brandon Lawson became more than just a missing person. He became a symbol of all the unsolved disappearances, of all the unanswered questions, of all the families living in limbo, waiting for answers that may never come. His story resonates because it touches on something universal. The fear of losing someone we love without explanation, without closure, without the chance to say goodbye. And while we remain unanswered, while the mystery persists, Brandon remains suspended in that moment between that last desperate connection and the silence that followed. He exists now not as a whole person, but as a question, as an enigma, as a ghostly presence that haunts that Texas road in the minds of all who know his story. Brandon Lawson's transformation from a real, living man into an unsolved mystery is a tragedy in itself, because he was more than this case. He was a father, a husband, a brother, a friend. He had dreams, fears, hopes, and failures like we all do. And somewhere, somehow, it all ended that August night. But how did it end? And why? These questions remain unanswered, echoing in the darkness of that deserted road, waiting for someone who can finally bring them to light. Right there, the truth is out there. So, you made it to the end. That means this story resonated with you as much as it resonated with me. And look, if you felt this connection, if you were intrigued by the mystery of Brandon Lawson, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Every day I bring you a real case like this, stories that make you question, reflect, and that you can't easily forget. It's the kind of content that goes beyond the surface, that respects your intelligence, and that treats these cases with the seriousness and humanity they deserve. And if you've truly stuck with me this far on this journey, leave a comment saying, I made it all the way. I read every comment and love knowing there are people on the other side who connect with these stories as much as I do. That's what makes this work worthwhile, knowing there's a community here that truly cares. Please leave a like, too, because it helps this video reach more people who are also interested in real cases, unsolved mysteries, and stories that need be told. Every like makes a real difference. And look, there's a video here about another disappearance with a cryptic message that will leave you even more intrigued. Click there and stay with me there, because the story I'm about to tell you is just as disturbing. Thanks for the company, and until the next mystery.